Hey guys, my name is Haley, and today it is very sunny outside, and I'm not used to this lighting because it's been raining for weeks. But I'm here for a book recommendation video, specifically 50 books to get you into reading is the catchphrase I've decided to use for this. And the idea is to have recommendations for every genre. Some of them are hyper-specific genres, so if that's your jam, please stick around. If not, some of them are more generic. Like, for example, Fourth Wing is on this list. What is my hair doing? Fourth Wing is on this list, but I feel like everyone and their mother, at least in the bookish world, knows what that is. So there are varying degrees of popularity involved in this. But I have 50 of them, so we might be here for a minute. So we're going to jump right on into the video. First off, I have fantasy. This I tried to lean less romantasy, but just to put it out there, fantasy, I have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, mainly because I need more people to go back and read this. This book came out over a decade ago at this point, and I read it back when it came out, as well as the sequel, and I feel like it's still a severely underrated book. I know that Laini Taylor's other series, Daughter of Smoke and Bone, was huge on Booktube back in the day. I don't know if the people still read that now, but I'm also going to be involving that in other videos, so stay tuned to that. But Strange the Dreamer is the story about this boy who knows that there is a lost city, and whenever he tries to think of the name of the city, the only name he can think of is called Weep, as if something terrible has happened there. And everybody tells him that he made it up, that it doesn't exist, and then one day he finds the city. And that's all. I'm going to leave it there with that. There is a romance subplot to this, but it is not the main focus of the story, in my opinion. But this is also a very fairy tale-esque fantasy. If you're very into those, I highly recommend this one. I cannot talk that much about every single one of these. We're going to be here forever. Second up, I have Romantasy, Fourth Wing. And in the vein of to get you into reading, if you have somebody in your life who hates reading and likes to watch fantasy shows or movies or anything like that, if you're someone who really only reads contemporary and wants to get into some fantasy, Fourth Wing. I really enjoyed Fourth Wing. I think it's very much the fun parts of fantasy, and there's a huge romantic subplot, so this is definitely delves into the romantasy aspect of it, but I will always recommend this book to people who are not well versed in reading or want to change genres. Next up, we have another oldie, and that is for sci-fi. I have Illuminae by, oh my god, what's his name? J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. It's told in like letters and documents and transcripts and like pictures sometimes. It's very multimedia focused, and this is the story about a boy and a girl break up one day, and then the same day that they break up, their planet gets invaded, and they end up on two different sides of this like intergalactic war on different ships, and they are being chased through the galaxy. And there are some slight horror AI aspects to this. I loved this book. It has stuck with me through the years, and I think it has dropped off the radar for a lot of people, and I feel like a lot of people would still be interested in it now if they knew that it existed. Next up, we have cosmic horror, which means like there's some outer force that's affecting the horror of the thing, and that is House of Leaves. This is also very multimedia focused, mixed media. You sometimes have to turn the book upside down to read the words. Sometimes the words are in a spiral. Sometimes you have to read the footnotes for the words on the page to make sense. It's a crazy ride. This to this day is still the scariest book I've ever read. It gave me actual nightmares, and as somebody who has read a lot of horror, I can count on one hand the amount of times that that has ever happened. And this book was the first one that ever did that to me, so it will always stick with me. A lot of the time when people ask me for my favorite book of all time, I honestly say this one. It's a wild ride. And we have slasher horror. And for that one, I have Cruel Honey by Piper C.J. This is a girl who ends up being a fake date, or I can't remember if it's a fake date or a sugar baby or something along those lines, to a very rich man. And they end up on this island with a bunch of rich people. And she's like, what am I doing here? I do not fit in with this crowd. And then things go awry. I also love the cover of this. I think Amazon made her get rid of it, which is so funny to me, but I highly recommend this, and I feel like not a lot of people have read it. Next up, we have queer horror, and for that I'm going to go with Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. This is the story of a screenwriter who is told at the very beginning of the book that he needs to kill off one of his main characters, preferably one of the queer ones, for shock value for a TV show. And he's trying to stand up to the executives who want him to do this. And as he is still contemplating whether or not he's going to give in to this ask of the CEOs, he starts being haunted by his old characters that he has written, and for some reason they are haunting him in real life. I will say, like all Chuck Tingles, this takes a really weird, like supernatural, bizarre turn. So be aware of that, but I think it's such a fun queer horror. Next up, we have a thriller, and that is, in general, John Mars, but specifically The Passengers, especially if you are new to sci-fi or new to dystopian. I highly recommend this one. This is a story about self-driving cars and how the self-driving cars end up kidnapping people at one time, and they're in a race to figure out what it is the kidnappers want from them while they're trapped in this car going like hundreds of miles an hour down the road. Sounds very Black Mirror. All of John Mars' books, in my opinion, are very Black Mirror-esque. I also have a where to start with John Mars video that I'll leave in the comments down below if you're interested in that. Next up, we have a queer YA, and for that I'm going to go with Gay the Pray Away by Natalie Naudus. This was one of my favorite books of, not last year, but the year before, so 2024, I believe. And this is the story of a young girl who is in a very, very high control religion, that one day she ends up finding herself attracted to another girl, a new girl in town, and she realizes that she may be queer. And it has one of my favorite scenes in any book ever, in which the librarian helps this girl get a hold of some books, but she has to like rip the covers off and like pretend it's a Bible because her parents won't allow them to be interested in those type of subjects. And I feel like this one in general was very, very eye-opening and distressing for me as somebody who came out of high control religion myself. I want every younger person in that church cult to be able to read this, just to have the perspective, even if they themselves do not relate to this on all of the levels of queerness involved in it. I feel like it's an important story that needs to be told. In the concept of how children, especially in those spaces, do not have any autonomy whatsoever, and how important libraries are. Next up, I have a middle grade book on racism, and that is New From Here by Kelly Yang, I believe. And this is the story of a family of younger kids who are in, I believe, Shanghai during the COVID lockdowns that started obviously much sooner over there than they did in America. And it is half of their family moving to America to try to escape the pandemic while the father stays home to work. And then as the pandemic follows them to America, the extreme racism that they end up facing, not only because of the pandemic, but because of how racist a lot of children are in America in the first place because of what they are taught from their parents. This book made me cry. Not a lot of middle grades can do that, so I always am going to recommend this one. Then we have a BDSM club romance, and I'm going to go with the Salacious Players Club if I can remember. I'm going to put all of them on here because there's 6. My favorite is Eyes on Me, which is the second one. But this is exactly what it sounds like. It's BDSM. There are some queer couples in here. There's also a poly couple in here in the third book. And I went on a huge kick of these when I left my religious cult, and I wasn't allowed to read any of the romances, especially spicy romance. So this series was very formative to me for somebody who was coming out of those spaces and trying to discover my own sexuality and my own interests. And I will always thank it for that. And then we have a queer BDSM romance, and for that one, I'm going to go with For Real by Alexis Hall. This, to this day, is still the only Alexis Hall that I've really liked. I don't know what was in this book that was so different from his other books, but this one is a dom-sub relationship between a older male and a younger, like 19-year-old, who end up in a dom-sub relationship, but the 19-year-old is the dom. And I'm going to leave it at that. It's very emotional. It's very interesting seeing them navigate their sexualities and their interests in that type of dynamic. And I really enjoyed this. To this day, this remains one of my favorite romance books of all time. YA dystopian. To get you into reading, I'm always going to recommend The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I feel like you've probably heard of this even if you're not a reader. I assume that a lot of you have at least seen the movies. It is a perfect introduction to YA dystopian. I'm going to leave it at that. Then we have a pandemic book, and for that I'm going to go with Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang. This I read earlier this year. It was one of the first books that I read, and it was on everybody's favorite books of last year. And I'm so glad that I eventually got to it sooner rather than later. Sometimes it takes me years to hear and like get to everybody's favorite books of the previous year. And this is the story of a girl who is I believe at the beginning she starts cleaning houses, and they keep ending up finding these like dead bodies. But also COVID hits while all of this is happening. And our main character, who is Asian, ends up facing so much racism from people who keep calling it the Chinese virus, and how they wouldn't even differentiate between different forms of Asian because Americans are not educated on that. But I do think this is one of my favorite pandemic books, and I've read several at this point since our worldwide pandemic that we had years ago, and it's still ongoing now as far as COVID goes. Next, we have a celebrity memoir. I can recommend several celebrities' memoirs, but one of my favorites personally recently has been Devout by David Archuleta. This is his story about how he was 16 on American Idol and how his dad kind of forced him to get into the whole singing business, and the emotional abuse that he suffered from his father, as well as coming out queer within the Mormon church, which is a fascinating story in and of itself. I loved this. As somebody who watched David on American Idol back in the day, this was very, very interesting and very validating for a queer memoir of somebody who grew up in a highly religious sect. Speaking of Christians, for an introduction to Christian nationalism, if you don't know what that's about, if you don't know what that is, if you want a definition and how it has influenced a lot of the politics over the last probably 10 or so years especially, I recommend The Violent Take It by Force by Matthew D. Taylor. This one in particular definitely covers January 6th in extreme detail and the groups that were behind it and how they were all radicalized to get to the point and what they did at that time. This also details a lot of Charlie Kirk's involvement in all of that, if you were not aware. I highly recommend this one for people who know nothing about Christian nationalism and want to learn. Then for deconstruction book, also in the nonfiction category and involving a lot of religious trauma, I'm going to go with Star Spangled Jesus by April LaJoy. This is her memoir about how she thought she was just being a good Christian, and then it turns out on January 6th when she saw a bunch of people that she knew there that, oh, I was a Christian nationalist. And she is no longer that, and now has a podcast with her and Tim called The Tim and April Show. And they combat a lot of the issues and talk about a lot of the problems that Christian nationalists are still causing in our current political climate. Her book is also very humorous. If you did not know, April's day job is doing comedy, and she does a bunch of comedy sketches on the internet. I love her and Tim's takes on all of the Christian nationalist propaganda that is being pushed towards us, especially in 2025 and 2026. Next up, we have religious trauma YA fiction, and for that I'm going to go with Say a Little Prayer, which this is the story of a girl who gets in trouble at school, and her punishment is to be sent to a religious summer camp. But the kicker is that it's her old church who is running it, and she left it before because of how they treated her sister. And we find out why her sister was kicked out years ago and how she doesn't want to be there. And she also believes that she is starting to be attracted to girls, and she has to deal with all of that while at a religious summer camp. So to take back her autonomy in that situation, she decides to do her best to commit the 7 deadly sins while at the summer camp. And this was a fun little romp. It's very fun, but it was also a very good portrayal of religious trauma in general and the reasons that people leave the church. So while this is a fun romp on the surface, it has a lot of really deep topics that it addresses. Then we have a fantasy book with some religious trauma, and for that I will always go with The Night and Its Moon by Piper C.J. This is the story of 2 young girls that were in a convent, not even a convent, like run by nuns. It is a foster home, I think, run by nuns, and the girls get separated when they are younger due to many circumstances beyond their control. And it is heavily implied throughout the series that they were falling in love with each other when they were separated. One of the girls becomes a sex worker, and another one ends up in a higher status situation. So it is a juxtaposition of both of their positions and how they ended up, and then eventually coming back together later on in the series. This is a 4-book series. I love this series, and I feel like it got a lot of bad rap for some reason when it first came out. I don't truly understand why, but I loved these. We have a queer western, and that is Bloomtown. Bloomtown is one of my favorite sapphic romances I've ever read in my life. It is a western. Am I a fan of westerns? No. Do I think I've ever read a western outside of this? Probably not. It's not usually my thing, especially American western, like cowboys, pew pew, not my jam. This, however, with the sapphic romance of Joey, who is I feel like in current day, Joey may have been considered non-binary, but that was not something that they really referred to back in those time periods. Our main character ends up on a train. She's going to be sent out on this train to meet her husband, who is doing the gold rush on the other side of the country. She has no interest in being with this husband. That is just what you did in this time period. And she gets kidnapped by a bunch of children on this train. And they bring her to Joey, and Joey wants to hold her for ransom, and then they end up falling in love with each other. There's also a lot of religious trauma involved in this during the Manifest Destiny area, where all of these like white men were told that the West was promised to them and that they could take whatever land they wanted. And the way women were treated in this time, all of that is discussed during this, and it is my favorite sapphic duology of all time. Next up, we have a YA portal fantasy, and I'm going to go with one of my old favorites that I've never seen anyone speak about on Booktube, and that is Pendragon by DJ McHale. This is the story of Bobby Pendragon. He finds out that his uncle has been kidnapped towards the beginning of the series, and that there is something he doesn't know about his uncle's life. And he gets thrust into the situation where he finds out there are portals to other worlds, and all of these places need saving, or all of the worlds, including Earth, will be collapsed if they do not defeat this evil that is happening. And with his uncle missing, that service and issue falls to him. And so he's learning it all on the go as he does. There are 10 different worlds in this. It is my favorite portal fantasy, and I've yet to find a portal fantasy since that I really enjoy, to be honest. Next up, we have a trad wife thriller, and for that I'm going to go with The Mad Wife. This is the story of a 1950s housewife who is kind of thrust into, again, the situation where she's not really thrilled to have to be married, but she also is not interested in having kids, but that's what you did at that time. And she is very much an unreliable narrator. And I'm going to leave it at that because this is a thriller and I don't want to give anything else away. In that same vein, we have trad wife speculative fiction. For that, I'm going to go with Yesteryear. Yesteryear is currently my favorite book of 2026. To be fair, it is still April. But I have a strong inkling that it's going to stay in the top 3, if not remain in the first place. But this is the story of a trad wife influencer, very similar to Ballerina Farm, which is Hannah Newman, or Nara Smith, which is the other person in this general vicinity. And it is her story of dealing with the internet, how she became this trad wife influencer, about how her husband is kind of like a dopey little like idiot, and she just like lets him live his life. And at one point, she gets supposedly transported back in time to the actual 1800s, in which she is a literal traditional wife, and her trying to figure out why she's there. I loved this. I also love the commentary not only on influencer culture and trad wives themselves, but also there's a touch of the manosphere, which her husband falls into. I loved all of the commentary in this. Then we have a book that feels like a fever dream, Our Wives Under the Sea. This is the story of a woman and her wife. She's married. She's going on a routine trip in a submarine for her job. And the trip that was supposed to take a week turns into, I think, like 6+ months of their entire thing going missing. And then one day she comes back and she is not the same. This is very trippy. I loved the ending of this, and it truly feels like a fever dream, because you can't tell what's real and what's not. Then we have a nonfiction on racism, healthcare, and school funding, and that I'm going to go with Dying of Whiteness. I feel like this is a very accessible nonfiction, especially for people who don't know anything about the American South, because this deals with specifically Tennessee and their healthcare system, Kansas and their schooling and school funding specifically, and then Missouri and their gun control issue and why they will never vote for gun control because of how much a part of the culture guns are down in the American South. I thought this was a very comprehensive look at all of 3 of those things, and if that's something that's interesting to you, please check this one out. Next up, we have a mermaid horror, and for that I'm going to go with Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, which is also Shannon McGuire, if you didn't know, who wrote the other Portal Fantasy series. And this is a story about killer mermaids that they find in the Marianas Trench. Oh my gosh, I need to go faster. I've already been filming for like 25 minutes. This is going to be a little long. Next up, I have a Why Choose Fantasy, and for that I'm going to go with The Broken Bonds. I'm going to be so for real with you. I remember this being Why Choose. I know it had to do with fantasy because there was a shadow like person, like Shadow Daddy energy. It was one of the 5 men. I don't remember much else about it because I read this when I was super sick like 2 or 3 years ago. Do I need to reread it? Yes. Was it the most fun series I had ever read at the time? Also, yes. Then I have a Why Choose Rockstar Romance. For that, I'm going to go with Lilac. I read this around the same time. It is a Why Choose of a girl who wants to be a singer, I believe. It's her relationship with the dudes on the Rockstar bus of them touring. And we have a book with an older main character. I'm going to go with The Har. This is a horror book about an old woman who is on this island. These billionaires want to buy the island and want to buy all the people out of it, so they are forced to leave. And there's like a handful of old people there who are just like, no, I'm not leaving and you can't pay me to leave. And this woman is one of them, and she finds this weird little thing on the beach. She brings it home and it becomes sentient. I'm going to leave it at that. Then we have haunted media or object a la The Ring. If you watch The Ring, the whole thing with that movie of the early 2000s horror is that it is a haunted videotape. And that if you watch it in 7 days, you will die. So anytime I come across any media that has to do with a haunted thing or like a haunted object that needs to like feed on other people to keep going, I love, because The Ring was the movie that scared the shit out of me when I was like 7. So my favorite adaptation of that I've ever read is Rotten Tommy, which is also by the same author as The Har, funnily enough. And this is the story of a haunted like videotape. And that's all I'm going to tell you. I loved this. Then we have a horror portal fantasy. It's not quite a portal fantasy, but it was close enough. More in the vein of House of Leaves than Pendragon, if that makes sense to you. If you make distinctions between your portal fantasies, and that is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. I feel like her horror books don't get as much attention as a lot of her fantasy ones do. And this is my favorite T. Kingfisher book. It is a story about this woman who goes back to like clean out her uncle's place, and she finds like this door in the wall. She opens it and it's one of those, the hallway is longer than it makes sense in the house, and she finds this like in-between world. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Next up, we have a weird girl lit book, and one I never hear people talk about is Blob. This is the story of this girl who is like struggling in life. She finds this literal blob that looks like a deflated sea creature on a trash can. She takes it home, and the sea creature becomes sentient and starts to like converse with her and turn into something that she did not expect. Is that a good enough description of this? Maybe. Then I have time travel fuckery. And for that, I'm going with a series I've never heard anybody talk about. It's a series of novellas that I read randomly. I don't even know how I found them. Somewhere on Kindle Unlimited. And that is the Living Past series, and the first one being The Viking and the Raven. This is like basically time travel has become this tourist trap, and the laws of it are very interesting, the way they deal with people in there. This was just a very, very fun romp, and I read like all 5 novellas in like 2 days. Next up, for a very specific recommendation, I don't know if all of these are like super intro into a genre, but if you like the specific ones, I have a few of those. This one being POV, Your Family is MAGA and Your Life Feels Like a Horror Movie. And I'm going to go with Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. This is a fictionalized version of basically people becoming indoctrinated by Fox News, but with its own weird, crazy horror twist, and was one of my favorite books of last year. And then I have a historical fiction about slavery, and I'm going to go with Copper Sun. This is the story of a girl who was literally kidnapped from Africa and brought over in the slave trade, and the horrors that happen to her when she becomes a slave within a very wealthy white American family. One of the triggers in this book, I will say, is infanticide, and I'm going to say that but not tell you much else because it scared the shit out of me and has been implanted in my brain. So if that is something that's triggering to you, please avoid this at all costs. Then we have The World is Ending Soon, and I'm going to go with We Have Reached the End of Our Show by Allie Gordon. This is a member of Team Stark, and if you do not know, that is where she is well known. And this is a story of 2 boyfriends. One ran away from a Mennonite community, and the other one does a lot of theater in New York City. So when the guy who ran away from the Mennonite community and escaped moved to New York City, they met each other. They've been dating. The New York actor has a terminal diagnosis, so he already knows that he's going to pass away. And then one day they find out on the news that the world will be ending in 28 days. And they go on a road trip cross country to get back to one of their families. I particularly loved all the discussion about religious trauma from the character who was Mennonite, as somebody who is very familiar with a lot of those high control religious spaces. But I also just love a really good, well done end of the world story, and this was fantastic. It's also very short and very easy to read if you are getting into dystopian or sci-fi. Then we have queer paranormal detectives with drag queens. And for that, I'm going to go with the Dead Serious series by Vaughn Cassidy. I'm losing my voice. This is a series about a man who is a mortician. He's very socially awkward. He doesn't like to go out and socialize, but he has been convinced to come out this one day with his friends, I believe, to celebrate a birthday. He chokes on an ice cube and almost dies and is resuscitated by the EMTs, goes home, and then discovers he can see ghosts. But the fun part about this is that the ghost he ends up seeing first happens to be a drag queen from a local bar, and she wants him to help her solve the case of her death. I love this series. I devoured it when I read it. Then we have Sexy Polycule, and for that I'm going to go with The Losers Duet by Harley LaRue. This is very much what it says. This is a continuation of the novella The Dare by the same author, if you are interested in reading the prequel to this. This is a very BDSM-focused polycule situation, and one of my favorites that I've ever seen done. Then we have Evil Puppets, which is very weird and specific, and for that I'm going to go with I Found Puppets Living Inside My Walls. I thought this was going to be a fun, silly little horror book. It was actually kind of horrific, haunted Sesame Street vibes. So if you're interested in that, definitely check this one out. Then we have Gay Cop Trauma with Great Demisexual Rep, also very specific, and that is my favorite series of all time, which is Criminal Intentions. This is a 30-book series. All of them are within like 100 to 200 pages, and it's my favorite thing that I've ever read. It's my favorite demisexual rep I've ever seen. I am demisexual, if you did not know. It is also really good at dealing with issues within cop dramas about the racism and the issues and how the cops are not always the good guys, and it's our main characters combating a lot of that as well. I love this series. I hope Cole McCade comes back and finishes it one day. Even though he already has 30 books out, I want more. Then we have a monster romance. My favorite monster romance is My Soul to Keep by Opal Rain. This girl is given as a sacrifice to this monster that they do, I think, once every few years. And it turns out the person, or the creature that she is sacrificed to, is not quite the monster that she was told that he is. Then we have Wrong Number Sapphic Romance. We have Wrong Number Right Woman. This was one of the first sapphic romances that I read coming out of my church cult, and I loved it. I also am completely biased to the wrong number text like trope. My favorite fan fiction of all time, back when I used to read a bunch of fan fiction, is the Glee fan fiction Little Numbers, which is a Blaine and Kurt fanfic. If you know about that fan fiction, please talk to me, because it's my favorite fanfic I've ever read of all time. And this reminded me very much of that, because the trope in that is that it's a wrong number that gets texted, and that's how they end up flirting and stuff all online before they end up meeting up in person. One of my favorite tropes, and this one does it really well. Then we have The Woman is the Dom in a BDSM situation, and for that one I have Shenny by, oh my gosh, what's her name? Rebecca Weatherspoon. And this is exactly what it says. There is also some switching in here, but I know it's very hard for people to find like female doms. At least it was back when I read this, especially probably like 5 or 6 years ago. Still one of my favorite romances that I've read. I have a book of feminine rage, and for that I'm going to go with You Must Not Miss. And this is a story about a girl who does a lot of writing in her notebook about this world that she believes she is making up, and then one day a doorway to that world shows up in like her backyard. And it has to do a lot with her being bullied at school and what she feels like she's going to do to her bullies that involves this fictional world. I loved this so much. I was so happy that it didn't have the like picture perfect happy ending of her like learning a lesson. It is just feminine rage. Then we have religious horror. This book is not completely religious, but one of the main character perspectives is, so I feel like it counts. And that is Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. Yes, it is the same Stephen Chbosky as The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And this is one of my favorite books of all time. It is probably my most annotated book of all time. And it deals a lot with the trauma of this. One of the main characters is a girl who is very religious. And it is about this boy who goes into the forest one day, does not remember why he was there, and he comes back with powers. That is the long and short of it. If you're a fan of Stranger Things, if you're a fan of Good Omens, please read this. Then we have creepy misogyny dystopia. For that I have Love Minus 80, which is this story about how women are cryogenically frozen into what are called bridesicles, and men can just like rent them out as they please in a weird sci-fi world. It's gross. It's weird. Very fascinating social commentary. And we have capitalism horror, which I have The Store. This book is literally about Amazon and Walmart and how they take over towns and like buy out like all of the small businesses, but in horror form. But the catch is that we all know that now in 2026. This book was written in like 1998. So I hate that. And it was so good. Okay, we have three more. Already at 36 minutes. This is going to be fun to edit. We have First Contact Sci-Fi. My favorite of those is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is the story of this girl who goes out and finds a statue one day that have popped out all over the world with no way of people knowing. Nobody knows where they came from. And it turns out they might have something to do with aliens. Love this series. Duology, not so much series, but I feel like people don't even know that Hank Green wrote a book with his brother being the person who has a million books of like YA fiction. I feel like a lot of people overlook Hanks for some reason. Number 49, we have a zombie book, and for that, I'm going to go with The Girl with All the Gifts. This is a really fun one. I am not going to tell you the twist of how anything happens, but it is about zombies, and it is about this girl. That's all I'm going to tell you because it's a wild ride from there. And then last is a queer historical, and my favorite of those is Andrew Joseph White's The Spear Bears Its Teeth. This is a story about a trans boy who was in the 1800s at a time period where if you were not exactly what society expected you to be, you get sent to a sanatorium. I'm losing steam here, guys. Hold on with me for these last few minutes. And there's this thing happening where they just called the veil sickness, where people's eyes turn purple and they can like see ghosts and such. And he gets sent to the sanatorium because he does not want to be the perfect little housewife that society and his parents expect him to be. And he finds queer community, or just community in general, within this sanatorium with a bunch of other people, as well as the person that he ends up courting. This has so much queer trauma. If that is something that is triggering for you, please, please check the triggers because it was a rough one. I cried so much during this book, and I recommend it to everyone that I meet, even people who do not like historical fiction, which, especially for me, I was very much not into historical before like last year. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I will recommend it to everyone. It turns out the only way that I will like historicals is if they are queer, so not necessarily all of them, but a lot of them. I'm way more likely to read them if they are in the vein of like queer people in a time where they were not considered fully human or got the rights of other people simply because they were different. That is something that will always be incredibly tragic to me and make me sob. And there you have it, my 50 book recommendations to get you into reading. Not all of these are like super entry level. Even if you are already a voracious reader, I hope you found something out of the specific recs that you might enjoy that you haven't heard of. But I hope you all enjoyed this. Let me know what your favorite book to recommend to other people is in the comments down below. If you don't have anything to say, please leave me the ghost emoji in the comments. But thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.